Tēnā koutou katoa. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you, everybody. Welcome to what we intend to be a really robust discussion on a somewhat daunting subject, the future of tourism. To unlock this subject for us, we're bringing you some insights and a potential way forward for the sector. We have some fantastic panellists here. I'm just going to introduce them. Martin Sneddon, I'm sure many of you know Martin. He has a long-standing involvement in tourism and sport, and he's been involved with the industry and public sector in setting the direction of tourism since way back in 2013. As CEO of the Tourism Industry Association, he led the development of Tourism 2025, and latterly he's chaired the Auckland Destination Leaders Group, run by Auckland Unlimited. Martin's also chair of Heart of the City. Mike Horne in the middle is CEO of Fuller's 360. He's on the Destination Auckland Leadership Group that Martin runs, and he has a long-standing history in tourism and transport. He's leading an on-water focus on the Hauraki Gulf and thinking about how we need to think about the Hauraki Gulf over the next 10 years so that Auckland remains a great place to live and visit. And finally, Grant Webster, who's CEO of Tourism Holdings, a global tourism operator, and the Deputy Chair of the Tourism Industry Association. He also chairs the Tourism Futures Task Force. Welcome to you all, and thank you for your participation. Okay, so Melissa preempted some of my stats, but the tourism industry, as we know, has been decimated as a result of COVID-19. It is the most impacted sector in our economy, and the numbers are truly startling. Economic losses from COVID-19 in the tourism sector over the next 4 years are estimated at $18 to $21 billion. Previously, tourism was over 20% of our exports, 10% of our GDP, and supported almost 400,000 jobs. A TIA survey has indicated that job losses will probably average around 50% for the tourism sector. So we're looking at probably around 200,000 job losses as a result of the pandemic. I don't want to be too despondent, but Mike, how does that look at a local level for an operator like Fuller's?
Well, it's been a really interesting and obviously pretty rough year. We're probably a little bit more diversified around our tourism and transport business than a lot of the straight tourism businesses that have been absolutely decimated. But to give you some sense of what we've been dealing with, we're a big, heavy asset. Vessels, expensive, capital-intensive business. We would usually be carrying around 6 million people a year. We're less than 50% of that. So the focus for us has really been around maintaining our staff, investing in our staff, and surviving through so that we can gear up as we move forward.
Huge. Well, we're not going to dwell on these negative numbers because this is all about the future. So first, let's talk about scenarios. Grant, what are we looking at in the coming years in terms of demand for tourism product?
Yeah, so the short answer is if anyone here knows, then come and see me afterwards because I'll give you a lot of money. So we don't know, right? And as an industry, we just did some work just recently over the last few weeks and really dug deep into a whole raft of criteria and scenarios and everything else to start to provide the industry with some direction. But ultimately, because it is so uncertain, we came up with what we ended up calling the wedge. And the wedge basically says that, look, at the bottom, on certain assumptions, we're going to be where we are today for a couple of years. So you need to plan for that scenario. At the top end of the wedge, there is a real sense that there could be very strong pent-up demand around the world for tourism, and particularly for a country like New Zealand in the way that we've managed it and the way that we're showing our values. So you've got to plan for both, is the reality. From a capital perspective, employment and everything else, you have to believe that anything within that wedge is going to happen. So we're just looking at those indicators to say, over time, how do we narrow that wedge? What are the indicators that start to tell us that we can get more certainty around it?
Thank you. Well, prior to the pandemic, I think everyone was aware that tourism had ballooned over the last few decades. In fact, from 1950 to 2019, our international arrivals grew 262 times, 5 times faster than the global sector. In 2019, we hosted 1 overseas visitor for every 1.3 Kiwis. Martin, what's the industry's view of that sort of astronomical growth?
Well, it wasn't just a steady growth over that period of time. It went through highs and lows, and there was a period, and both these two guys will remember this, where 10, 11, 12 years ago, it had sort of stagnated actually, and at that time then the industry got together, and together we planned the future. And this is why we can do this now, you know. But 10 years ago we looked at where we were at, we looked at what we were doing right, what we were doing wrong. We looked at the world and understood the environment that we were likely to be living in subsequent years. And we created the plan called Tourism 2025. It was focused very much on setting a direction for the industry where the growth would be. And remarkably, it really took off after that. And we had an aspiration of hitting 41 billion as the total value of tourism by 2025. We started, I think, probably around 23 or 24 billion at the time in 2013. We hit that 41 billion mark in, I think, about 2020. It was remarkable growth. But with that came something that we probably hadn't expected, and that is the impact that such growth would have on our various destinations. So as time went on, we started to realise we actually, to preserve not only the growth in tourism, but our own environments and to keep the goodwill of the people living and working in those environments, we actually had to start concentrating on destination management. And that's really where the movement towards what ultimately became known as Destination Auckland 2025 went. That, as far as we know, was one of the first efforts anywhere in the tourism world to actually concentrate just solely on destination management and look to see you know, how we could preserve that richness and how we could create that harmony where livers, workers and visitors could actually live together, or could coexist together, and where the visitor destination actually saw tourism as being a really vibrant part of its community rather than an absolute pain in the butt.
That's interesting. So the Destination Leaders Group, the Destination Management Plan that you were just talking about, it's all about managing the destination, as you've said, rather than marketing it so much. You've had to review that now with COVID, haven't you? Can you give us a sense of what you've had to rejig?
Oh, that's right. Once COVID hit us, then all bets were off. And so the plan itself got reshaped into something a little bit more short-term, a little bit more targeted to help us sort of deal with, we didn't know what we were dealing with, but to start to deal with whatever it was. And so, you know, you had to concentrate on whatever the available target markets were, significantly domestic at that time. You kept a watch on sustainability because that was going to be really important. You concentrated on the products and experiences because that's always important. But you know, Jane, probably the most important thing it did was a group of what was about 20 or so leaders within the tourism sector in Auckland actually started leaning on each other and really helping each other and just providing that safe place to go while solutions were tried to be worked on. And as that happened, and I think the enjoyment and the satisfaction people got of working together, that group has grown, and you know, it's open-ended. We don't turn people away, but there are people latching on to that group all the time, and that's a key part of our future. That collaboration and relationships that exist within that group.
Oh, it's great to hear. Great to hear. Mike, as a transport and tourism operator in Auckland, what are your recovery strategies for Fuller's 360, and what are going to be your priorities over the next 2 to 5 years?
Yeah, good question, Jane. So when COVID hit seriously and we went into lockdown, just briefly, I was lucky enough to be able to break my business into 2 parts. One part was to deal with what was right in front of us, how we're going to operate, what do we do with staff. The other half of it was to take that longer term view in terms of what do we need to do, not just to come out of this, but to keep progressing a lot of the things that we needed to do. And so there's a number of specific things that we've done, but essentially the first thing is having a really good plan and working to that plan. So we've been doing that for the last year and a half. What are the key ones with that? Principally, it's actually about about investing back into our fleet. When I talk about that, I start to talk about green technology, electrification, and those sorts of things, which we can talk about a bit later on if we get a chance. The second thing was really investing back in our workforce. We're somewhat unique in terms of the maritime and the tourism side of what we do. So we've got a lot of regulation, there's a lot of safety, but there's also a customer experience, which is incredibly important. So that has a really tight plan around how we grow from within, noting that it's very difficult to get people from outside, which we're all talking about at this point. Third thing is really around community. So it's given us an opportunity to step back and really look at how we operate both with the Auckland local community. Obviously, we have Waiheke communities and others which we're learning how to work with in quite different ways. Martin was talking about destination management. That's a big focus of how we move forward from here. Before we start to think about Australians, and then we think further down the track about opening borders. That's not core to where we are at the moment. Fantastic when that happens, but we've had to account for this could be a slow burn. And probably the last thing is really around climate and environment, and where we see one of our core abilities is to really change the nature of what it looks like on Auckland's harbour around decarbonisation in particular, but a whole range of other benefits that we really need to focus on.
It's great to see you doing that during this period. I mean, you're partnering with Hamilton Jet, aren't you, and decarbonising your industry whilst you wait for it to ramp up again.
Yeah, it's really about what partners we've invested with. Hamilton Jet is a really good example of that. They're world leading, they're locally based, and you think about them as a jet boat company. They're a technology company, and they're well ahead of anybody else. And there are other really key partners here in New Zealand. EV Maritime, you might have seen some stuff around shovel ready, around building electric boats. That's for tourism benefits. That's for New Zealand recovery benefits. That's rebuilding boat building industry in New Zealand, and then you start to think about export. So all of that capability sits here in New Zealand. It's really exciting.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thanks, Mike. Grant, can you please give us an overview of this Tourism Future Task Force interim report that was prepared in December 2020? What are the key strategies that are being proposed by the task force, and why has it only recently seen the light of day? I think it was only released by government in April this year.
It's another one. If someone can answer that, then afterwards I'll give them a lot of money. So, look, my interpretation of, in terms of just answering the end and then coming back, so my interpretation of where we sort of got to was the draft, we had a change in the Minister of Tourism and the Minister of Conservation. So they were the briefing ministers. So it changed scope somewhat. But then we also had the Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment report come out, the Climate Commission report come out. So when all those came together, they were all heading in a certain direction. So I think there's been an opportunity to say, hey, look, what do we do in terms of reframing this? So and it was a draft report that was provided. So where that had taken things, the brief was very much to look at the future. It wasn't about today, albeit maybe that was something that should have been done. And it wasn't about the bridge to the future. So there's a piece of work that needs to be done in that respect. So it looked at work that had been done previously and what needs to happen. It took a future state approach, a regenerative approach, very much based in a four capitals approach. And what we realised through the process as well, that we really had to embed ourselves in terms of Te Ao Māori and really understand the place of that within New Zealand and New Zealand tourism. So a vision that's talking about enriching Aotearoa and creating 5 different future states that are about industry thriving, about empowering communities, about te taio regenerating, about Aotearoa whakapapa, and about creating data and knowledge insights in a different way. And there's 21 recommendations that come off those, and it was very much looked at creating system change. So what we saw is an industry that has focused very heavily on issue and action. And because we've been so focused on that, there wasn't changes fundamentally to the system. So hopefully we will see moving forward some real changes in that space. And it's things like we do need to look at the Department of Conservation and how it operates and what its intent is. And we need to look at things like understanding where customers actually go on the government's network and how we can influence them through data and technology. We need to look at supply. We need to look at our positioning as a country. We need to look at, very importantly, how we drive tourism from a community perspective rather than just an airline capacity perspective. And so we'll see what comes out next. The Minister of Tourism has talked about potential for an industry transformation plan. I think there's a real opportunity to take those things forward from there.
Oh, exciting. Thank you. Let's focus on Auckland specifically now. Last week, the Minister of Tourism, Stuart Nash, launched his Tourism Communities Support, Recovery and Reset Plan. Between now and 2023, there's $200 million of funding tagged to that plan. There are various grants and funds that are attached to it, but a substantial focus seems to have been given to South Island communities. There's a view that the funds should be targeted to regions and activities that need them most. There's a grant of $26 million to go to regional tourism organisations to enable them to manage, plan and promote market tourism activities in their regions. Will Auckland benefit from this, and why is it? Is there an Auckland focus to this plan? Martin.
Listen, there was lots of what was talked about by Minister Nash and his plan that had already been recognised in Auckland and was part of what we were doing, and a lot of it was also based around relationships and partnerships, which underpins the way we're trying to progress. What we've really been hoping for, I think, from central government is an understanding of Auckland's place in the overall visitor economy of New Zealand. Now, prior to COVID, there was some credible work done which put a figure of, say, 28%. Auckland being representing 28% of the entire national visitor economy. So that's significant. That's bigger than anywhere else. There were jobs, so I think it was 55,000 jobs directly within tourism, and another 65,000 of that indirect that tourism's so good at and feeding other parts of our economy. And we had hoped that when there were announcements of investment happening within tourism, that would be recognised and proportionally, not disproportionately. So, but that hasn't happened so far. All right, so it hasn't happened, and we have to accept that. I think what we're really after, in addition to, I think, proportionate investment, is for government to really understand and use to the best of its ability its role as an enabler, and to be communicating really carefully and clearly with the industry as to what they're thinking and what's coming. And I think that could be improved quite significantly. I think, for example, as we look forward to a future situation where the border will open, it'll be a progressive opening into different markets, that actually a lot of the work that's done to enable that to happen is done well in advance and is communicated well in advance, and that obvious scenarios of, we know it's not going to be a linear opening, we know it's going to have its blips, what will we do in certain circumstances to cope? And so we're all well prepared, and not give the impression that thinking's happening at the time that we're meant to be open. And if we could get to that will help Auckland, because Auckland, a bit like Queenstown, within the total value of its visitor economy, has a high proportion of international visitors, and that's not the same for a lot of other places which are more dependent on domestic tourism. So, we need that clarity so that the industry can take best advantage of what's coming. And so that's, I guess my hope for government is that they connect with us a lot more strongly, that they understand this situation better, and they understand their role as an enabler and play it to the full. And if they do that, they're going to get a lot of support within the Auckland region.
Thanks, Martin. Now, there's an action plan being developed from this summit. If you had to pick, gentlemen, 2 or 3 things that would make the most difference for Auckland's future tourism, what would they be? Let's start with you, Mike.
Well, I think we need to really understand that Auckland is a destination. It's not just a gateway. And if we take that approach, I think probably the biggest one for me is around connectivity, and by that I mean physical connectivity, so transport, integration, being able to let visitors but also Aucklanders move around seamlessly, and it's about productivity, it's also about experience. So our part in that would be around working with the Auckland Transports and others around what ferry connectivity looks like, more capacity, more boats, more frequency, and alternatives to congestion, and using that harbour really effectively, which is Auckland's jewel in the crown. So that'd be one key one. The second one is really around workforce, especially around tourism, but generally. So a highly motivated, engaged, trained workforce is clearly what we need. And that comes with many challenges, but that's where we should be focusing at the moment. And probably the other one that I'm going to talk about just briefly is really around capability. So we can all do a lot of work, and the collaboration is starting to happen around what visions look like, and increasingly what a plan looks like, and what we need to achieve. But within different organisations, of which I include local government and government, there needs to be capability there to deliver. And that delivery capability is a different skill set often. I mean, there's so many people in this room at the moment who would put their hands up to say, we can help, we're really good in logistics, or we can help, we're really good at this. And I think those people are putting their hands up. So if you don't have those sorts of people in your organisation, then they're the people that you should be reaching out to, and that's about the enabling bit. So I think that's really important.
Thank you. Let's go to you, Martin. What are your 2 or 3 things?
Staying with the destination management theme, Auckland is quite a diverse region, and so what needs to happen and is starting to happen is local destination management planning. And Waihiki's a great example, and I think Mike's aware of this, of a group there that has really grabbed hold of this opportunity in an area that has benefited from growth but suffered from the amount of growth. And so destination management plans at a local level across the Auckland regions pretty important. The workforce within tourism is always a challenge, and so the brilliant initiative that Matt Snedden from Auckland Unlimited has created, which was flying before COVID, which hit road bumps because of the loss of employment opportunities during COVID, now needs to be really reinvigorated and embraced by all of those within the tourism industry, because that's how we're going to attract talent and awareness of the range of opportunities and the career path opportunities that exist within tourism.
This is Matt's Go With Tourism Workforce Initiative, isn't it?
Yeah, and then finally, and I detected this just listening to Helen Clark, where she talked about what had happened in Auckland with the creation of the super city. We need political leadership that central government can grab hold of at a local level, so the two of them can come together and really paint that aspirational picture that the whole of our community can get up and get behind. And instead of us being embroiled in all sorts of political game playing, we're actually working together as a community for a picture that we believe in as what Auckland can look like into the future.
Fantastic. Grant, your 2 or 3 things.
Yeah, look, I try and keep it really brief. So apart from taking a systems approach to things, as I said before, not just issue and action, I think the part of the destination management plans, which has been picked up well in Auckland and in other regions, is they have to connect into a national plan. There's no point in one part of the country doing something and not understanding that New Zealand is about journeys from a tourism perspective. So I think being clear about that. I think the second thing is we've had a massive capacity reduction through this period. So rental car fleets are down about 50%, motorhomes 45%, coaches and so forth and so on. Now's the time for central government to help with the electrification and to change the infrastructure from that perspective. So that'd probably be number two. And number three being maybe a little bit different, a little bit controversial perhaps. Again, this point of supply, so both from a local and central government perspective and an industry perspective, right now, nobody knows what we have. So we don't know how many kayak operators we've got, or boat licenses, or you can just get a rental car license, so forth and so on. And then you've got the same thing for the Department of Conservation. So unless we know what our supply and what our product situation is, then how can we address infrastructure demand, and how can we understand where customers are travelling and what our needs are? So there's a fundamental system error there that I think needs to be fixed.
Thank you, thank you. We're going to take a couple of questions now. Post-pandemic, global travellers will have a lot of choice. Are our tourism products and services world class, and are they good value, or are they overpriced and dated? Who wants to take that one? Might be a good one for an operator like you, Grant, I think.
Oh, look, this isn't particularly my view, but it has been said that we've got a 5-star natural environment and a 3-star product suite that goes with it. So that has been said. I think we do have pockets of world-class tourism product without any doubt. The challenge right now is the investment cycle to actually get things going, right? So we've got 2 years where you just haven't had an ability to invest. So you've got refurb catch-ups and all sorts of things. Then you've got to get your balance sheet right from this period in tourism to actually be able to invest again. So again, things like government improving and doing things like accelerated depreciation to get the investment up quickly will get us where we need to be. Are we there today? Pockets are, majority are pretty good, and a few areas that we've got to improve.
Okay, thank you. How is the tourism industry working on addressing the carbon emission generated by the industry pre-COVID and traveller expectations of unacceptability? Who wants to take that one, Mike or Martin?
I'm happy to jump in around where we're up to at the moment, because obviously being a tourism provider and a really heavy transport provider as well, it's something that's pretty close to our heart at the moment. So R&D happening over the last 3 years. The state of technology around battery electric and increasingly around things like hydrogen is really well known. The reality is, if I'm talking about boats, it's about how you package up those and what the charging infrastructure is that sits around that. All of that is essentially ready now, and I can see within the next 5 to 10 years, you could have, if we commit to that, the full fleet in Auckland. I'm not talking about my vessels, I'm talking about all the fleet being 100% decarbonised. Now that goes an awful long way to cutting big amounts of carbon out.
This is a worldwide trend, really, that we can't ignore, that we have to find ways of going with. And our visitors are going to hold us to this. And so we may as well get ahead of the 8 ball as quickly as we can and buy into it and find workable solutions. It doesn't have to be overnight. There just has to be a clear intent and progress made.
We've heard a lot about green technology and the potential of it here, so I think it's very important. Is the current... Go ahead, Mike. Sorry. Yeah.
It's less about the potential now. Actually, this stuff exists now. It's actually about getting the investment in and starting to both progress that from a build sense and also progress that from, bringing external investment in as well. This doesn't have to be all funded by government or local government. Their part is really around the infrastructure that wraps around that, and that's where a lot of value can be added. Sorry.
Awesome, thank you. Another question, is the current organisational structure for Tourism New Zealand geared well for future post-COVID and climate-friendly tourism strategy? Shall I throw that to you, Grant, I think?
Very quickly, my personal opinion is absolutely yes. I think they've done a lot of research in this space, understand it well, and will deliver the strategies. I haven't seen it, but they're just going into their new 4-year statement of intent. My understanding is it's very focused in the space. So I think they're in a good position.
It's a moment in time, Jane, where all balls are up in the air, and that all of those who are involved in growing awareness of New Zealand as a destination overseas have to take this opportunity created by Covert to reset and rethink how best we're going to achieve that going forward.
Thanks, Martin. Awesome. Okay, how do you think the government cutting immigration will impact on tourism recovery? Who would like to take that question? Maybe you, Martin?
It's a balancing act between trying to ensure that there's some skills coming in here that we need, but as with what I mentioned before, the Go With Tourism initiative, it's trying to attract those who live in New Zealand, New Zealanders and those who spend long periods of time here, into really believing that tourism's a career path, and therefore finding our own solutions over a period of time to filling up what we need to fill within the industry.
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap there. Just a few themes, which I think some of which have been common to other talks today. This is a time of reset. Now is the time to plan and prepare for pent-up demand. Get investment in. Progress things like building a decarbonisation capability. Community destination management plans matter, but they need to be connected to a national plan. Auckland is the largest visitor market. It was pre-COVID, 28% of our visitors came to Auckland. Collaboration is key. Government needs to be an enabler, and they need to understand the potential of Auckland. Can we please thank our panellists in the usual way?